So I understand the live feed is live streaming right now. So good morning and welcome to the Joint Capital Improvement Plan, or CIP, meeting of the Williamsburg County Schools, James City County Board of Supervisors, the Williamsburg City Council. Ms. Sursa, would you call the school board roll, please?
Dr. Beers.
Here.
Ms. Cook.
Here.
Mr. Dowell.
Here.
Ms. Hummel.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mrs. Young.
Here.
Ms. Ownby.
Here. And I will pass it to Mayor Pons for roll call.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Sandy, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
And I'll now pass it to Chairman Eisenhower to call roll for the Board of Supervisors.
Hey, for the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Ms. Sadler.
Here.
Mr. McGlennon. Here. Ms. Larson.
Here.
Mr. Hippel. And Mr. Eisenhower.
Here.
We'll circle back when Mr. Hippel joins.
Okay, so I'll just spend the first few minutes here doing some housekeeping. I know Ms. Thursday emailed everyone, and so this may be redundant, but I'll just go through it again because we're Zooming and we're not here in person. Wanted to remind folks to please keep your mic on mute to reduce background noise unless you're speaking. And then when you want to make a comment once the presentations are done, I'm going to go old school and ask folks just to physically raise your hand. And I think it's just easier sometimes than doing it electronically. So just go old school, and I will call on you. And it's my understanding no one is using the phone, so everyone is going to have a video live feed. It's live now, and the chat feature has not been enabled, so there is no chat function. So hopefully Mr. Hippel will be on in a few more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and proceed. I've got some opening remarks, and then I will pass it on to Dr. Herron. But again, welcome. While our March 13th joint meeting was canceled due to COVID, and today we're meeting via Zoom, I'm grateful for our partnership and these joint meetings to learn more about our capital needs. None of us could have predicted 2020. It's been an incredible year, one that I'm ready to move away from and forget, quite frankly. But we're hoping this experience is an anomaly and the fallout from it as well. And sometime soon, things will look and feel more normal. So we're here today to plan for our future, our children's future. I don't want to steal our superintendent's thunder. She and staff will be presenting in detail the proposed CIP. But I did want to highlight today that last year, as you remember, we did request a 10th elementary school. The need for that elementary school was well documented. And as you all remember, our three boards agreed 3 years ago that we would begin the discussion of adding additional space when we reached 85% capacity, and that we would act once we had reached 90% capacity, recognizing that when we signed that resolution, we were well over that 90% threshold. So we come together today with a CIP that in many ways looks a lot like last year's. We're still requesting a 10th elementary school because even with the loss of approximately 500 students due to COVID, which we believe is a temporary anomaly, we're still at 89.6% capacity. And I have stated many, many times before that the students that WJCC is now serving are changing drastically, even from year to year. Our special education numbers have increased from 15% last year to 18.8% this year. Our English language learners and our economically disadvantaged students numbers continue to climb. And as we learned at our special joint meeting with Mr. Regenbaugh, our homeless students are 3 times out of the state. So these demographics critically impact the delivery of instruction, they impact our workforce, and the need for instructional space. The school board takes its fiduciary responsibility very seriously, and all budget needs are well documented and data driven. The CIP presented today is conservative, and it considers our response to COVID and our ever-changing demographics. Our CIP has not drastically changed in what we asked for last year, but the timeline for that request has changed. Some large ticket items have been pushed outside of the 5 years. Others have been bumped out a little, and still others remain on target. We've done really well to present what we believe is a pause due to COVID. At the end of the day, only 1 year of the CIP is funded, and because we believe 2020 to be an anomaly, we think it would not be prudent to make drastic changes at this point within the 5-year CIP. That could change next year. We are hopeful for 2021. WJCC Schools is eager to participate in an inclusive community conversation about preschool. The county was working on that, which was led by staff and social services just as COVID hit. And I do believe it was at the very last liaison meeting when Rebecca Van Root was reporting on committee work that was pulling together all the players in our community, which included child development resources, the community action agency, social services, and the schools. And so that process to strategically plan and have a broad conversation had just started. So COVID impacted that progress, but the division is eager to pick up that planning conversation and to be a part of that process. So I now will turn it over to Dr. Herron and staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Chair Eisenhower, members of the Board of Supervisors, Mayor Pons, City Council members, and school board members. Thank you for the opportunity to present the proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal year 22 through 31 this morning. The recommendation is significantly different from that brought forward by the annual Capital Improvement Committee. The committee makes its recommendations prior to our annual fall enrollment count on September 30th and prior to the annual projections of the future enrollment by Future Think. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on our current enrollment, and this has led to significant changes in the request for instructional space over the next 10 years at both the high school and the elementary levels. Let me just shout out a few highlights before I pass over to our Chief Financial Officer this morning. Firstly, we've moved over 18 million in last year's CIP for high school space out beyond the 5 years. We've moved back the request for an elementary school back by 2 more years to allow us to assess how quickly students return to WJCC schools following the pandemic. Based on the moderate projections, we will be back to our last year's enrollment at elementary by 2025-26. And also, no projects were funded last year due to the pandemic, and most projects have been moved by 1 year. As background to the presentation, Ms. Ownby has already mentioned the formal resolution that all boards took that we would add additional space, talk about additional space at 85% capacity and actually make a decision at 90% capacity. In addition, our resolution states that we would review annually the utilization of projection of student enrollment to determine our approach to planning. Prior to 2018, the division consistently used most likely enrollment. In fact, that is what is recommended by Future Think on an annual basis. Due to very slow growth in 2018, we determined to use the low projection and have done so for the last 2 years. This year, as I'm sure you'll agree, we're in a very unusual situation with the pandemic significantly impacting enrollment. We've lost 590 students, with 436 of those at the elementary level. Ms. Ewing will talk about why this year we are using moderate projections for planning rather than low. These terms, per Future Think, are to be interpreted very differently due to the pandemic. At this point, I would like to hand over to Ms. Ewing, our Chief Financial Officer, who will take us through the presentation that focuses mainly on fiscal year 2022. Thank you, Ms. Ewing.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Each year, the school division adopts a 10-year capital improvement plan to project and plan for future needs and to allow for adequate time and opportunity to prepare and budget for those needs. This morning, I'll be sharing with you a summary of the superintendent's proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal years 22 through 26, which is the first 5 years of the proposed 10-year capital improvement plan. We've provided in board docs a spreadsheet by school providing project details over the next 10 years, a Word document providing project details by project type over the next 10 years, and a project description sheet for projects in fiscal year 22, which is the next funding year. Before reviewing the superintendent's proposed CIP plan, I'd like to share the current status of projects that were previously approved in fiscal years 19 and 20. As everyone is aware, due to COVID-19, all projects were put on hold in the spring, and most are still on hold, including partial refurbishments at Norge, James River, and Stonehouse, as well as the repainting and resurfacing of the Matoka roof. The design of the Berkeley HVAC replacement and partial roof repairs are 30% complete. During last year's budget process, 3 projects at Norge, the gym floor replacement, restroom update, and tile replacement were funded through balances from completed projects. Those are currently on hold as well. We are currently in the process of completing the Stonehouse roof repairs, as well as the replacement of the walk-in refrigerator and freezer at Jamestown. We are just starting the process for the design of the War Hill Auxiliary Gym and Shelter. The division's low enrollment projection for the current school year from the October 2019 Future Think report, prior to any thought of a pandemic on the horizon, was 11,389. Our current year enrollment is 10,858 as of September 30th. For the enrollment projections this year, the low projection includes this year's decline in enrollment and assumes that students will remain outside of WJCC for the foreseeable future, and enrollment will continue to decline due to the pandemic. The high projection discounts this year's enrollment and assumes everything returns to normal next year. The moderate projection discounts this year's enrollment, considering that this year will not be the new normal moving forward, but we aren't going to return to previous growth immediately. And the most likely projection remains between the moderate and high. We began using the low enrollment projection for planning purposes in 2018, knowing that this would be reviewed annually. We are planning to utilize the moderate projections this year. The reason for that is simple. We believe the current enrollment is an anomaly due to the pandemic. While we don't anticipate that it is our new normal, we acknowledge that we may not return to previous growth immediately. Kindergarten enrollment is down across the Commonwealth this year as families have opted to defer their child's enrollment. State Superintendent James Lane shared that school divisions should anticipate a larger kindergarten cohort enrolling next school year for 2021-2022 as schools likely return to more normal operating conditions. As we review projects within the plan, I will share the school capacity as it compares to the moderate projections and the impact on projects within the superintendent's proposed CIP. The estimate for projects in the capital improvement plan include anticipated A&E, contingency, and an annual escalation rate of 3% per annum. A new project may appear in the CIP for the first time due to new or updated information. For example, new state requirements or mandates, or for safety reasons. This table shows Future Think's moderate projected enrollment as it compares to the division's capacity for high schools. As you can see, Lafayette is currently at 85% capacity, or 1,123 students, and is projected to remain around 85% for the next 10 years. Jamestown is currently over capacity at 1,257 students, or 104% capacity, and is projected to remain at that level throughout the next 10 years. War Hill's current enrollment is 1,340 students, or 93% capacity, and is projected to remain at that level through the next 10 years. Overall, high school capacity remains on average around 93%. Based on the most recent enrollment projections, the superintendent's proposed CIP separates the Jamestown cafeteria expansion from the school expansion, with the cafeteria space design in fiscal year 22 and construction in fiscal year 23. This will give the school the much needed space to accommodate their current student population. The Jamestown school expansion is proposed to move from fiscal years 24 and 25 to fiscal years 27 and 28. I would like to note that a trailer was added at Jamestown this school year to assist with their space needs, which is currently utilized for various social studies classes. The renovation of space at Lafayette is currently included in the plan in fiscal year 22 for design and in fiscal year 24 for construction, and it is recommended to move construction up to fiscal year 23. These renovations will increase capacity at Lafayette and overall high school capacity by approximately 150 students. The expansion of War Hill is currently in fiscal year 23, and it is proposed to move to fiscal year 27. Design funds were allocated in fiscal year 20 for the War Hill Auxiliary Gym, and construction funds are still anticipated to be allocated in fiscal year 22. These changes will move out the more costly additions at Jamestown and War Hill beyond the 5-year plan, but give Jamestown much needed cafeteria space. The renovation at Lafayette is less expensive than building additions at the other two schools, and by adding the additional space at Lafayette, it will bring overall high school capacity to approximately 90%. This table shows Future Think's moderate projected enrollment as it compares to the division's capacity for middle schools. Overall, middle school capacity is currently at 81.7% and doesn't reach 85% until fiscal year 29. Based on the projected middle school enrollment for the next 10 years being on average 82% and not yet reaching the 90% capacity overall where action needs to be taken, phase 2 of James Blair would be in fiscal year 32 or later. That means that the design and construction of a new central office can also be moved to fiscal years 30-31. This is evaluated each year as updated enrollment data is available. This table shows the elementary moderate projected enrollment with pre-K added. Overall, we are currently at 89.6% capacity with 2 schools over 95%, Matthew Whaley and Stonehouse, both of which have trailers to assist with space needs. Trailers are not reflected in the effective capacity in this table as they are a short-term solution to address space needs. Overall, the division will be at 95% capacity in fiscal year 25 and is expected to increase each year to 101% in fiscal year 30. There's been a significant decrease in enrollment at the elementary level this year. Based on projections that we will not be back at the fiscal year 20 level until fiscal year 26, the superintendent recommends that the new elementary school be placed in fiscal year 24 for design and construction in fiscal year 25. The school was originally requested in fiscal years 21 and 22 during last year's budget process, but was moved to fiscal years 26 and 27 as part of the city and county's adopted plan. Based on current enrollment information, the best placement for the school is in fiscal year 24 and 25. The moderate enrollment projections with pre-K added will take us back to last year's enrollment levels in 25-26. So if we design a new elementary school in 24 and build in 25 and 26, we will be ready for students in the fall of 2027. As for pre-K space, we continue to believe this is part of a larger community conversation about preschool education needs in our community that stretch beyond just the school division. As such, construction of additional pre-K space has not been placed in the 10-year CIP until we have time to collaborate with city and county leaders on long-term goals and plans for preschool services in our community. Since funding is appropriated annually, our focus is really on the next fiscal year. Project costs have all been updated to account for shifting of all projects originally in fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22. Aside from cost escalation, modifications to fiscal year 22 from the current adopted plan include the following. Design of the Jamestown cafeteria expansion at an estimated cost of $221,400. Adjusting the funding request for parking lots, sidewalks, and concrete repairs to be a flat $300,000 each year. This is an increase of $160,000 for fiscal year 22. Adjusting playground funding to be a flat $100,000 each year. This is an increase of $10,000 to fiscal year 22. Total adjustments to fiscal year 22 is an increase of $391,400. Modifications to the plan not previously discussed include the following. We have removed the replacement of electrical switchgear at Laurel Lane in fiscal year 23, as this was done as part of the HVAC replacement project in fiscal year 20. The roof replacement for Stonehouse has been moved from fiscal year 28 to fiscal year 27, so it can be completed in conjunction with the HVAC replacement currently in fiscal year 26. The cost estimate has also been updated based on an estimate received earlier this year. Projects have been added to years 6 through 10 based on our current replacement cycles. Those projects include roof replacements for DJ Montague, Blayton, and Hornsby in fiscal year 31. HVAC replacements for Blayton and Hornsby have been added with the cost split across fiscal years 30 and 31. Parking lot, sidewalk, and concrete repair funding has been added in fiscal years 29 through 31 to maintain level funding of $300,000 each year, as well as playground funding in those same years to maintain level funding of $100,000 each year. 5 additional school buses have been placed in the CIP to accommodate the opening of the 10th elementary school. This is just a placeholder until a determination is made on neighborhood feeder patterns for the new school. Those feeder patterns are typically established during the year prior to the school opening and before the budget is adopted, so the number and type of additional buses that will be needed to support the new school can be adjusted as more information is available. We have also reviewed the refurbishment projects in fiscal years 27 through 31 and split those costs, the cost of larger projects like refurbishments and HVAC replacements over 2 years. HVAC and window projects account for 24% of the total 5-year CIP, or $17,131,400. Roof replacements, school refurbishments, and renovation projects account for 10% of the total 5-year budget, or $7,275,700. Projects grouped into the other category include items such as walk-in refrigerator, freezer replacements for cafeterias, generator replacements, electrical repairs, as well as division-wide projects such as parking, brickwork, and playground equipment. The total cost estimated over the next 5 years is $5,448,800, or 8% of the total 5-year CIP. The total cost for construction is estimated at $40,874,200, which is 58% of the 5-year budget for capital improvements. In total, the recommended 5-year plan amounts to $70,730,100. To highlight our major projects, fiscal year 22 contains the design for the Lafayette renovation and Jamestown cafeteria expansion, as well as construction funds for the War Hill Auxiliary Gym. Fiscal year 23 contains construction of the Lafayette renovation and Jamestown cafeteria expansion. Fiscal year 24 includes the design of the new elementary school, and fiscal year 25 includes the construction of the new elementary school. Thank you for your consideration of this CIP recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
I'd be
John.
curious to know, I'm sorry, Lisa, am I okay to go ahead and start?
Yes, sorry.
Thanks. I'd be curious to know some information about the number of elementary school classrooms that are currently dedicated to pre-K. And this is part of a broader question, obviously, as undoubtedly you're aware. I raised the question at our last Board of Supervisors meeting about the possibility of beginning that investigation of pre-K in the community, rather than waiting till some future date to address this very important question. I think that it's important for us to begin the conversation in an educated way, because obviously, while the school board has the responsibility for making programmatic decisions, those decisions have operational and capital implications that will come to the City Council and Board of Supervisors for funding. I took the opportunity to talk to Rebecca Vinroot earlier this week just to get a sense of what was going on with the group that Ms. Ownby referred to earlier that has been investigating this question of pre-K. And I believe that, excuse me, while they were working on the potential for a grant to fund information gathering, that was kind of lost in the COVID situation. And they're kind of at a place now where they would like to get started again, but need some resources. And so what I'd like to have us consider today is the possibility that we can, in fact, take advantage of the fact that we do have some time as we're making decisions about capital improvement budgets to begin speaking from the same page, with the same information and the same kind of sense of what we're trying to accomplish, both for the school system as a whole, but also for the community and how we intend to address pre-K. It's my feeling that we have a significant issue facing the community in terms of pre-K education. We know that there are children who are being served, and they're currently being served in elementary school space by and large because they are mandated to be served. We also know that there are some children who are at risk who are being served in these programs, but that there are many who are on a waiting list or who have indicated a desire for services who would be at risk. In addition, we don't know how broadly the number of children who may be at risk are not currently on a waiting list or have not yet been identified. And I think it's important for us on an equity basis to try to recognize the value of pre-K by creating an opportunity for us to look at how much we need to be doing in this area. And I don't think that it serves us well to defer action on that investigation. And so what I would propose that we do today is to agree that we would ask this group that has been meeting, that includes the schools, social services, CDR, community action, to come together and serve as a kind of advisory group for us to gather information and evaluate that information. I think that they would need to have some staffing available to them. And that staffing might just be a researcher who is capable of gathering the factual information about what currently exists, what the needs may be, and for the advisory group to gather the opinions of people in the community about what questions we should be asking as we think about how to address the need for pre-K. We know that the governor is going to be talking later this month about his pre-K initiative that may propose an even broader expansion of services beyond those with mandated needs and those who are at risk. And I think we want to be prepared to move boldly to address this concern in the community. Whether that takes the form of some dedicated spaces in the community, city and county, to deal with pre-K, to provide facilities that are designed around the needs of children who are not yet at the kindergarten level, whether it has an impact on the amount of available space that's in elementary schools currently dedicated to pre-K, or what the most efficient way and most effective way to address the needs of these children might be, that this is the time for us to begin that process and to do so in a way that gives us better information before we have to make the very serious decisions about the priorities for funding facilities and the ways in which we go about addressing these programmatic needs. So what I'd ask is that we think about the possibility that either through any kind of grant funding that this group may be able to identify, or if necessary, through funding by the city and county, to bring on a staff person to gather information that can be evaluated by this task force, I'll call it, and present to us in a joint meeting. That would also allow, both at the front end and once recommendations or options are presented to us, for public comment on the questions involved. And I'd like to see us be able to do that by September of this coming year. I think that would give us a chance to seriously evaluate the options in front of us, to make sure that we are, on the one hand, recognizing the current situation that exists with our facilities, and to evaluate the best solutions that might be available for the community to provide a robust pre-K program that really addresses the equity needs of our community. So that's really the gist of the suggestion that I would like to make today, and hope that we could come out of this meeting with an agreement that we wanted to move forward and give that group a charge that allows us to expect the ability to address these questions within the first 3 quarters of the coming year.
Thank you, Mr. McGlinnan. Barb, Ms. Ramsey?
So I agree with John. I was just curious, did Rebecca give you any indication of the resources she felt would be needed to sort of stand this up and do the work necessary to proceed?
Yeah, we talked about it a bit, and I think she felt that if we were able either to get a grant, which was the intention of the group initially, but which might delay the process significantly, or if we were able to dedicate resources from the city and county, we would probably be talking about a temporary hire of a qualified researcher for half or 3/4 of a year. So probably somewhere in the range of between $50,000 and $100,000 total.
Thank you.
Mr. Maslin, you've got your hand up.
John, just following up on Barb's comment, is there a role or an opportunity for the School of Education to help out on this task force?
Well, I think if they might be a very good source for identifying a researcher capable of gathering the appropriate information and providing us with that kind of guidance. So certainly we'd want to let them know about what we're doing and ask if they have recommendations or suggestions in that regard, Ted.
Thanks.
Are there additional thoughts or questions about that, or something else on the CIP? Dr. Beers?
Yeah, just to make a comment about the School of Education. Many, many years ago, the School of Education actually had an early childhood program. They had degrees, and then made the decision to drop that program. I think there may very well be other institutions who have stronger folks in the area of early childhood education. I think the focus there has been more in terms of preschool special education. But I certainly think it's a resource to consider. And you have other professionals in the community that also have very, very strong backgrounds in the early childhood area, and it's a growing area. So I think, John, I completely agree that I'd like to see that the study working on this as we're moving forward towards the creation of a new elementary school, because there obviously there are going to be decisions that have to be made about location, number of students, that sort of thing. So I think, to me, that dovetails really well. I really think that's a good idea.
Ms. Cook, did I see your hand up?
Thank you. Mr. McGlennon, I just want to thank you for your leadership and for really articulating, I think, a really positive way forward. And I agree with you 100%. The one thing I would add is that I'd like to just challenge everybody on this call to think about what questions you have and make sure that this task force that you're calling it understands those questions. So, because I don't want them to go and do their work and then present it to us and then find out that there were questions that we had that were unanswered. So whether that's related to programmatic concerns or facility concerns, I think it's important for all three bodies to really get those questions out early, because it may impact their work and the questions that they try to answer together. So I just would encourage everyone to do that sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. Additional comments or questions or thoughts? Mayor Pons and then Ruth, second. Mayor Pons.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'd like, John, thank you for bringing up that point. I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered relative to pre-K, and I think there's some uncertainty, at least with some of the folks on this call, about the timing of an elementary school, and without having an analysis done on the needs for pre-K students. And so I applaud that concept. And to follow up on Ms. Cook, would maybe want to expand that task force to include, at least a member from each of these three bodies: the city, the county, and the school system. Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond, I think that's a very good suggestion, Mayor Pons, that would tie us back in to the groups that ultimately will have the responsibility for working this out, figuring out the right path forward.
Thank you. Ms. Larson?
My question is not preschool related, so if there's any other preschool questions, I'll wait.
Dr. Herron.
I could just make a comment from an educational perspective. There is no greater investment than this community can make than in pre-K. That's where it all begins. That's where the equity issues start to be addressed. So I am delighted that we're considering this kind of a group. Thank you.
Mr. Hippel?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with John, and we've discussed this. It seems like at least 4 years now in these same meetings, and it's very frustrating that we haven't gone any further in 4 years than we have talking about the same thing that we're talking about today. And we need to definitely address pre-K. I'm not in favor of the elementary school at this point in this time. I think if we address the pre-K issue, it'll address the other issue. And I think that's the first thing we need to get. We need to grab these children while they're young. I know our teachers are doing a great job, and I know y'all are working within what y'all have to work with. But I think the pre-K, and like I say, I got to give it to John. He has brought that up for 4 years and carried this torch of something that needs to be done, something that's a concern, not only to this board, but to the citizens and to your board as well. I know, not that y'all don't have concerns about that. I know you do very much. But I think this is a point that we can put this together, get a task force formed, and then have members of the bodies as well in the task force. And then what we do normally at our board meetings, when we have a task force, we have the task force go to each body and say, what are you looking for? And what are you trying to find out with this task force? So they would go around to each body and ask individually, what is that body trying to look for? And have a general meeting. And then their task to go out and come up with a direction in order for us to move forward. So I appreciate the chance to comment. Thank you.
Mr. Hippel, I'm going to call on Mr. Kelly and then Mr. Rogers. Mr. Kelly, we can't hear you. You're still muted.
I was speaking brilliant stuff to the mute button. I apologize for that. So, Mr. Hippel, I appreciate your frustration with 4 years talking about this issue. So we're about half as long as we talked about building James Blair. So we're getting there, right? It seems that this community, when we make investments into schools, into elementary, into building schools, it takes us a long time to talk about that. And then when we build them, they're already full. So, I heard your comments from a couple of meetings ago where you talked about building extra capacity for the police and the fire station, and we don't seem to follow that same paradigm when we're talking about the schools. My concern is I don't know that the pre-K and the elementary are mutually exclusive. Our pre-K is not in every one of our schools. I mean, it does take classroom space, but I still don't believe that if we build a pre-K system that it unloads our elementary schools to the capacity that we need it. The Future Think numbers that we got last year were obviously did not anticipate what we are living with today. So as they develop their models for this year, there's really no model for where we are, and there's no prediction for where we're going. There's no I don't know how we can put a lot of faith into what they're saying. What we do know is that there is a lot of student population out there, 590 kids that didn't show up this year that we were expecting. And I think those kids are still out there. And so the question is, when do they come back? And then the question is, when do they come? Those kids right now are all elementary schools. So do they come back in middle school and high school? It really has no bearing on our elementary capacity. Those elementary kids are moving in and being born and growing now. So, there's still, I think, a lot of pent up capacity at the elementary level that we really need to think about. The superintendent in her proposed CIP pushed that elementary school out a bit. So that gives us some time to understand how the community is going to at large is going to react to where we are and how we recover from it and how those kids. But as you look at our community, I do see significant housing construction going on in both the city and the county. I see 6 lanes between Richmond and Norfolk, and I see a wonderful community about halfway in between that people would love to live in. I see an ever increasing special ed and ever increasing English language learners. Those kids require additional smaller group spaces, smaller 2-student teacher ratios. And that requires more classrooms, and that requires more buildings. I mean, I think that's, and at the end of the day, they could be a much greater percentage of our student population than where we are now. So we're gonna need space. What I also see is I see an incredibly stressed teaching staff. I see people leaving the teaching profession in droves. As a matter of fact, why do they do that? Stress of the job, compensation, which does not align with the demands and the working conditions that we ask the teachers to live in. I see it every day in my life, and I see it in my work life. I actually hired a former teacher from one of the school systems on the peninsula. She's doing a great job for me, and she must have been a great teacher. So a preschool doesn't address all those needs. It doesn't address the needs of our teaching staff, and because as we looked at that video last year that we talked about from Norge, we have teachers teaching in hallways. We have divided classrooms. We took away teacher space, planning areas, teacher rooms where they can get away, and made those learning environments. And so we really need to address the whole picture of the working conditions and where we're putting our teachers. So, and then how that affects our kids. So, freeing up a couple of classrooms and some elementary spaces, I just don't think that meets the systemic needs of our population and our community and what our community expects. So, you know, I think we've done the right thing by pushing our school expansions out, pushing the elementary out into the planning period. I think that gives time for both the school system and the funding partners to figure out, you know, where we're going and where the school would be and how it would be. But it also gives us time to adjust the plan as conditions on the ground change. And you know, in the past year, certainly conditions on the ground have certainly changed, right? So you know, I just don't know that these two issues are mutually exclusive. They might be ands instead of ors. So I just think we need to think about that going forward as well.
And I can understand, Madam Chair, may I rebuttal?
Yes.
Thank you.
Rebuttal? Mike, come on, we're not rebutting here.
No. And I see where you're coming from, but you know, we've used our low numbers have always worked. Now we're going to a higher number than our low numbers. And of course, a little here and a little there adds up at the end of the day. And also you've got to look at it. I know the stress from the teachers, and because the environment they're working in now, COVID-19 has changed everybody's environment, including ours, to be able to sit together and see each other across the room. So I agree with the stress and the stress level that, you know, teachers are having to deal with a lot of stress, just trying to figure out what's happening tomorrow. And we on the board are doing the same thing, trying to figure out, okay, how do we fund everything? How do we fund all the needs? What do we have the biggest bang? And that's why I think that, yeah, will this be a magic wand? No, but will it be a starting point? Yes. And will it give us the opportunity to look further into other things, and knowing that we haven't put the cart before the horse, that we've looked at the right beginnings and elementary and that sort of thing ahead of building the elementary school and what relief that'll be. And usually 100, and we're talking about, I know we said Jamestown, excuse me, Jamestown is over capacity, and Lafayette will add another 150 after we do the renovations. So that'll relieve some things there too. So, you know, we've got to look at all those things across the board. And I know y'all do, and we do as well as the funding partner to the schools, and figure out where do we spend and what can we get the biggest bang for. And it's never easy to sit there and go, of course, we on the boards would love to be able to go, okay, go ahead and build it. Let's roll. Let's go ahead and take it. But there's a limited amount of funds, and there's going to be even more limited amount of funds coming in this year. But with that being said, I want to say how well the school board has tightened their numbers up and how well they saved funds, and the county as well. So it's been a joint effort, and both bodies have done an excellent job of trying to cut corners through this COVID issue.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, I totally agree with you. You know, the General Assembly tasked us with putting together a budget of need, not a budget of what you guys can afford, right? So,
right.
And I think we've done a pretty good job of working with you on that to make sure that we're pulling on the rope together, and you know, we have that common goal. The other thing I think we have to also acknowledge is that a year ago, our teachers were stressed and overstressed, and we were working them pretty hard in the conditions that we were asking them to work. Now you put COVID-19 on top of that, and you know, are you going to be Zoom tomorrow? Or are you going to be in person tomorrow? And the preps and the stress with all of that, not to mention the stress that we all have about this whole pandemic over our heads. You know, we're asking an awful lot of our teachers. I just think we just need to acknowledge that. And also, to your point, that's also why we pushed all that stuff out, right? We pushed the high school expansions out because, you know, this pandemic might have us kind of adjust how we deliver high school education, certainly. And so we may not need as much space going out there in the out years. But the elementary, you got to get those little kids in and got to get them teaching, got to get them learning how to read. You got to get them doing, you know, math and science at the early ages, or else you don't stand a chance at the end. So, I really think that we need to, and we've pushed that out too, as we see how we adjust. But I think it allows all the boards and all the funding partners to figure out how we're going to afford that. So, but I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Mr. Kelly and Mr. Hippel. I know that Caleb and Mr. Rogers and Ms. Larson, also Mr. Eisenhower have their hands up. So I think Mr. Rogers and then Ms. Larson, were you speaking to pre-K, or if you're not, then I think I'll do Mr. Rogers, Mr. Eisenhower, and then Ms. Ruth, and then whoever else raises their hand. So Mr. Rogers, please.
Thank you, Ms. Omi. I just have a quick programmatic question. Thank you as well, Dr. Heron and Ms. Ewing, for your presentations. Because we have that tip over point of 85, 90% enrollment, will we have the numbers, the projections from Future Think on enrollment numbers going ahead in enough time of the accelerated timeline that Mr. McGlennon is proposing for the task force?
I think we will have numbers. I think the fact that we've moved the elementary school out by 2 or 3 years now, it gives us an opportunity to really look at everything. We are already at 89, almost 90% in elementary right now. Last year we were at 97% with pre-K included. Of that, we actually have, if we go back to where we were last year, in 3 years, we will have 3 schools, Matthew Whaley, Stonehouse, and Matoka, at 100%, and they have no pre-K in those buildings right now.
Okay, thank you. Those will be critical for the task force work. So just wanted to make sure.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And then just a point of clarification, Dr. Heron. So with the 3 schools that are significantly overcrowded, 2 of them have trailers, Matthew Whaley and Stonehouse. Is that correct?
That's correct right now.
And Matoka would need a trailer.
Matoka possibly, not for certainly a couple of years now. Not until we get back to where we were.
Thank you. Mr. Eisenhower and then Ms. Larson.
Hey, I wanted to just make an observation. First of all, thank Dr. McGlennon for raising the proposal. I think I strongly support that. I think we need to take a very close look at what we want this program of pre-K to look like in our community, and we need to know it by this coming fall. I look at how we got to where we are. It appears to me that this has always been an incremental thing. Different programs. There's Head Start. There's some classrooms that are in our schools, some that are not in our schools. There are Bright Beginnings. There are all sorts of different categories of people at risk. And when we got the legislation that says we got to do all of this, we didn't have a plan necessarily. And the obvious solution, which the school board took, was to, okay, we'll just put this into the elementary schools. And it has evolved. Whether it stays in the elementary schools completely or partially, or whether it moves to some other type of environment, I think is something that we need to find out what the community expects and what this program is going to look like in the future from this task force. So I think that's number one, the most important thing we need to be doing right now this upcoming year. I will say that let me go back and talk a little bit about the low figures and the 85 and the 90%. Mr. Kelly is absolutely right. There are times when I first moved here, we had one high school, and the argument about building the second high school went on and on and on and on for years, so that when the second high school opened, it was at capacity. And we've had that happen to us many, many times. You got to remember, however, that was during a time period when we were experiencing 5-6% growth a year, and we were getting really behind the 8 ball. I think what we were trying to figure out here with this 85 and 90% was they're reasonable triggers. We need to start doing something at 90%, but it also assumes what we do will be contingent upon where that goes from the 90%. For example, if we were to say that we were at 90% on any one of our categories, and we want to try to build a new facility, but like this elementary school, but our numbers are flat for 10 years out, and we go ahead and build it, then what happens is we have a tremendous amount of unused capacity. And then the problem we have is that that becomes an incremental cost of operating another school that goes on forever. That's $2 or $3 million. So that's the financial aspect that we have to look at. You know, if you built a new school and we sat at 90% right now, and you built a new school, we might have our whole system capacity down around 80% for 10 years. That's not, it's wonderful for you guys. You know, the teachers would love it, but is that fiscally prudent for us and our taxpayers? So, you know, being too far behind it or too far ahead of it is what I worry about. And it's a guessing game. It's a guessing game about what the growth is going to be like. And we have to take a look at what happens on a year-to-year basis. So I will say that I'm not adverse to looking at all this, a new elementary school. I'm not adverse to looking at a pre-K dedicated facilities or some combination thereof. But I think that until we know what we want to do with all of these programs and what our citizens expect us to do to meet the needs of the children in this community, it's premature for us to start making strong decisions on it. We need this study first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eisenhower. I will call on Ms. Larson in a second. I just wanted to add something, if I could, to Mr. Eisenhower's comments. I appreciate your concern, and we definitely take our fiduciary responsibility very seriously. But when we're looking at future growth, we also need, there's that where it merges with programs. And so as Mr. Kelly pointed out, conditions on the ground with our demographics have changed, and we now recognize there will be COVID slide. So if all of our elementary schools were at 80% capacity, we could do small group instruction. We could meet the needs of our ever-changing demographics, our homeless students, our economically disadvantaged students, our special education students, our students who we have to remediate because of COVID slide. So I don't think space would ever go unused. And so there is this place where future growth and programmatic issues need to come together and recognize that smaller class sizes are something that we could aspire to if we want to continue to provide really great educational opportunities for our students. Ms. Larson, you've waited so patiently. I will pass it to you and then look for additional hands.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions in regards to talking about getting back the numbers. I had asked Ms. Ownby this and just wanted to follow up, because when I listened to Governor Northam's press conference, I believe yesterday or the day before, his plan is to have medical people vaccinated and others on the front lines, and then immediately try to work towards teachers being vaccinated. So I'm wondering what your plan is for your staff, because I think if there's not going to be a robust effort to get that done, or if you're going to have resistance from your teachers as far as getting vaccinated, then what does next fall look like? You know, that's part of my worry as we look at this CIP and trying to plan. You know, I mean, I hope that we would all be of the thought that kids need to get in the classroom. And a special shout out to your special ed group that has been in the classroom since September. And I know you've tried with other groups in elementary as well. I would hope we would have a goal of getting kids back as soon as we can, but there's so much that's sort of riding on, you know, what are you going to do about the vaccine, or when do you plan to have that discussion? I imagine you can't answer that question today. And, you know, I have seen the stress that your teaching staff is dealing with, and I so appreciate what they're doing. But I do have to say, you know, just about everybody is stressed out over this COVID. Our county employees were furloughed. We've got county employees that are dealing every day with the public And so I don't want them to not be acknowledged either. And I live in it is multi-generational. And so I see the stress that these families are not knowing how to plan what needs are going to be. So I just want to recognize everyone that's been dealing with COVID-19. It's crazy. And then just a follow up on the preschool discussion, which I think is very important, but I want us to be very careful because we always say what the community wants. Let's see what the community wants. But then we can't deliver on what the community wants because of fiscal problems or issues. And so, I hope that this group, I look forward to the discussion, but I just want us to remain very realistic as we proceed, because I think if we could offer pre-K to everyone 3 and up would be great. But I think that the 2 localities, once we saw the fiscal reality of that, would go, oh, whoa. And so I don't want the community to misunderstand that we're just going to be able to, in a year, we're going to have the space, the money, or the people to deal with that. So I just cautionary tale as we move forward. So just some idea about when you're going to be discussing how you're going to deal with COVID and the vaccine. So then we might know what school might look like in the fall. Thank you.
I see a couple of hands, but Dr. Heron, did you want to respond to that?
Just a quick response. Ms. Larson, good question. We don't know about the plan for delivery of the vaccine in detail yet. Obviously, we're in contact with the Peninsula Health Department and they're beginning to make plans. As soon as it becomes available, we will certainly be encouraging teachers on the front line to be first in line to take the vaccine so that they feel comfortable going back in the classroom, because that's where all of us want to be, with every teacher in every classroom and every single student there. Interestingly, I do believe that our enrollment will come back of the students that are not here right now. There's a significant number that are kindergarten, where families kept them at home this year. And even the state superintendent has made a comment about the fact there's going to be a bubble in enrollment next year. In fact, over 90% of our loss at elementary is K3. And so I really, always looking to the glass half full, I really believe we'll be moving back to a similar enrollment within a couple of years.
Thank you, Dr. Heron. I'm going to call on Ms. Hummel and then Mr. McGlennon.
Thanks. I want to say I appreciate Ms. Larson's comments about the process for the vaccines, because I also just want to make sure that we are looking at that from a policy decision. What vaccine is available? What kind of requirements can we set? Policies can we set that will ensure that our employees that come into the school are safe? And then that takes one of the big issues off of our plate for everybody else to come in the fall. The other thing I just wanted to bring up is I think it would be useful for all of us to take a macro view of our situation and look at some of the benchmarking studies that have happened that we have. We do this with teacher pay. We do this with comparing our schools' sizes, classroom sizes, with our localities that are close to us, because I think overall we want to remain a very attractive community for people to want to come to. And I think the more we stress the schools, the more we have problems with massive overcrowding in our schools. Some of the challenges that we're facing with pay with our teachers. And if our other localities have kind of figured it out and have a better option, it's just not good for our community as a whole. So I just would like all of us to look at the picture of the value of education, K through 12 education in our community, and make a renewed commitment to valuing that, especially when we are kind of competing with their localities for employees, for students, and for everything else. So that's just my point.
Thank you, Ms. Hummel. Mr. McGlinnan. Oh, Ruth,
I just want to follow up real quick because Ms. Cook has brought this up as well about our other comparable communities and the fact that they have more schools than we. So I want to understand that, and I'm not asking today, but I want to understand how many kids do they have? What's their class size look like? Just because someone has additional buildings, it doesn't always mean that they're operating a lot differently than we are. So at some point, and maybe we will find out that they are indeed doing so, but at some point, can we get some further delve into that information on these like communities that have additional elementary schools? What's their class size like, et cetera? Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly can do that.
Thanks, Ms. Lawson. Mr. McGlinnan.
Thanks, Ms. Ownby. I just wanted to sort of, if I could, make sure that we go out of this meeting with an understanding, not a formal vote, but an understanding that we're going to move forward with this concept on looking at pre-K, and just encourage everybody, because I know there are a lot of opinions out there about these questions, to be thinking about what they would like addressed in these deliberations. So I think the idea of including a member from each of the three boards on this advisory group will be very helpful. And I also think, as I read through the Future Think report, it did strike me that at the beginning of the report, your consultants indicated that among the things that they typically will look at in evaluating or in looking at enrollment projections and trends would be pre-K programs. And I think it would be really helpful if that were included in the Future Think discussion presentation in the future, just so that it is part of what we're all examining and recognizing. In a sense, as we have gone through all of this, we've not really been focused on the fact that there is a significant program that is in need of space that isn't really discussed in the Future Think document. And so I think it really would be helpful for us to know that, so that we take it into account as we're thinking about space needs, facility needs, operational budget needs, and so forth. But if I could just ask if we signal that there is a consensus to move forward on this.
I believe there's consensus to move forward, and I'm assuming staff of the three bodies can work that out. We have several hands that are up and flashing here. I think Dr. Heron wanted to respond to Mr. McGlinnan, and then Dr. Beers, I think Mr. Hippel. Dr. Heron.
Dr. McGlinnan will certainly ask Future Think about the inclusion of that and why they do or don't do that, and we'll provide you some information surrounding that, sir.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I see everyone's hands. I'm going to do the flurry here. So I think Dr. Beers. And you're muted.
I think the other thing, I may not be absolutely sure about this, but I thought it was my understanding that the state doesn't really use preschool numbers in terms of determining the funding that a division gets. I might be wrong about that, but so I think that's one of the reasons that those numbers weren't considered. John, you may know more about that than I do, but I thought that the pre-K numbers, however, that, you know, however many they are, that the state doesn't include that in their total count, but I'm not absolutely positive.
Right. And I don't know the answer to that either, Jim, but I think that, you know, as we're discussing facilities, it is an important consideration to know have a program that
absolutely
space.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So, and then I'm going to call Ms. Young next, and it may be that the next logical place, the next discussion regarding the task force would be liaison. And so I believe liaison was to January. So maybe we'll stop this kind of conversation and formalize what that's going to look like, or the players and all the details in the next liaison meeting. If that works for folks. And then I know Ms. Young has had her hand up, and Ms. Sadler. So Ms. Young, and then I think Ms. Poole too. Ms. Young.
Right. The only, I was going to recommend that it be discussed at liaison, because I think one of the two things, number one, we don't know what the governor's initiative is going to propose exactly. I mean, and that may completely change the landscape of where we need to go. But secondly, Mr. McLennan, thank you for bringing this up, because I think this is a huge concern of mine also. But I do think we need to decide who is going to be responsible for this task force and who we would like to head it up. And I think that needs to be defined very specifically, because it, like it's been pointed out, the discussion has been going on for many years now, at least I think almost the whole time I've been on the school board. And I would like to have a definite plan and a definite resolution to some of this. So thank you, Mr. McLennan, for bringing it up. And I made a lot of notes about what you said, and I appreciate your input very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Ms. Sadler, you've been very patient.
Hi, sorry, I had to go let the dog out. Things we do when we're on Zoom, right? The only comment that I had was just something in general that I still remain a little concerned or confused maybe about the methodology that we use for growth in the localities and thus in the schools. And I know I know that FutureThink uses the number of 2.87 per household. I'm not sure where they get that number. US Census, I know for the county, I believe is at 2.54. I think for the city, it's 2.26, I believe. So just for future reference, seems to me like we should be using the same methodology, schools and localities. And the reason I bring that up is that I still remain confused about the number of students that we see allotted for coming out of age-restricted communities. Example, colonial heritage. And I know we average it out based on, you know, the overall locality. But if we're using, just for example, I just jotted this down, colonial heritage has 1,049 units. The difference between the 2.87 with FutureThink and 2.54 with the census is 0.34. You take 1,049 times the 0.34 and you have 357 kids coming out of colonial heritage. If we're going to use these, the FutureThink numbers, which based on what I've seen, looks like our growth is leveling out as it has over the past few years. 2020 is, you know, 2020 is a wash. It seems to me like we need to take those age-restricted communities into account and have some more realistic numbers. So that's my only concern right now, and something that I think we need perhaps for a different day, but right now it still confuses me why it seems like the numbers get jacked up based on our age-restricted communities. So that's all I had. Just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Ms. Sadler, Dr. Heron, can you speak to that? We addressed that when FutureThink presented to us.
I believe so. Ms. Ewan, do you have any background on that? Because I know there's a lot of different pieces of information go into the FutureThink report.
Yeah, I remember she spoke about getting the total number of housing permits issued by each locality. I can follow up and ask if it's possible to get that information and exclude, for example, colonial heritage. I would assume the county information that she gets knows it by neighborhood. So I can follow up on that.
I specifically, yeah, I asked her about that.
Yeah, Ms. Hummel, what was the conversation, Ms. Hummel?
I said, I asked the consultant specifically about that in our last school board meeting when she presented. And I was under the impression they had accommodated for that.
I don't think so.
Yeah, that was my recollection. I believe Ms. Cook's recollection, and we will confirm that and get it back to you. But we had that specific conversation, and we were told that those age-restricted communities were backed out. Ms. Sadler.
Yeah, sorry. So I just wanted to make sure, if we're going by building permits, a lot of the building permits are happening in these age-restricted communities. So I just want to make sure we don't just do a general building permit methodology in determining this. So that's been my only concern. But if you could confirm that for me, I would appreciate it, because I'm under the impression that those numbers have not been backed out. So I would love to have that confirmed. Thank you.
We will work on that. Thanks so much for bringing that up. And Dr. Heron, then I think Mr. Hipple, did you have your hand up, Mr. Hipple? No. Okay. All right, Dr. Heron.
Ms. Sadler, we're certainly look into that. I know over the last several years, their projections, this year being an exception because it's so unusual, have literally been within a handful of students of being accurate in projections. So, but we will certainly look at the methodology. And if you've got specific questions, I would ask you to maybe push them to the board chair, and we can certainly consider and make sure that they are getting the right information from the county and city, and asked to do it really well. Over the years, their projections have been incredibly accurate.
Thank you, Dr. Heron. Are there additional comments or questions about other aspects of the CIP as presented today? Mr. Hipple.
Yes, one other thing before we leave. When we compare other school districts to ours, we need to compare what the county or city is putting into their funding for that, because they may have other funding sources that they're putting in there depending on military and that sort of thing. In York County, you know, they get a different cut than what we get, and depending on how wealthy a community is. So we need to look at all that, because I think we're at 105% above, and we're doing very well as far as what we put in money-wise into the community, into schools. So we just got to make sure when we compare that, we don't compare it just to, okay, they're getting this, and it depends on how much the community itself, through their taxes and all that, are actually putting into the school system. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hipple. I'll call on Ms. Cook next. I think just to speak to that, it was my understanding from our special joint meeting with Mr. Regenball that WJCC and the city of Williamsburg are putting in significantly more than the state requires, but so are our surrounding bodies. And so I think all of our local communities are in the same boat with regard to supporting their schools significantly, but we can definitely compare those apples to apples. Ms. Cook? And
yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hipple, I agree with you, but I don't think that, I mean, the state doesn't support CIPs or capital at all, which is an issue. So 100% of capital expenses are borne 100% by the local governments. And so in this particular case, I think that conversation is really about operating. But I do think it's worthy of noting that even though some, almost all school divisions our size have more elementary schools, I haven't toured all of the others, but when I do go to schools in other parts of the state, it is remarkable how high quality ours are. The difference is incredible. Ours are so well maintained, and that is done with the money from the localities. And so, you know, on one hand, I believe we have too few elementary schools, but on the other hand, when it comes to the quality of those schools and the upkeep, I wouldn't change that. They're incredible, and that is because of this group's commitment to the quality of those schools. So I wanted to say that. But I do think, and it really, you know, James City County puts in almost twice what York County puts in to schools, and that's really unfortunate. But it's a system we can't change. And so what I don't want to see happen is because of the state's really warped system, and I think the state is completely at fault here, and they need to increase their contribution across the state, but here as well. And I think they need to take into account other considerations like homelessness and other things that they don't, and special ed as well. They ignore those two things. Those are federal issues. I think because it costs us more, the city has an even higher local composite index. I don't want that to be a reason to not invest. It's unfortunate, it's unfair, but I think we still need to do it because at the end of the day, it's about our kids. And so I just want to say that. Thank you.
And I would agree, you know, and that's what I think we've shown throughout the years. We're not going to stop, but we're also going to be prudent with any monies that we do spend, which we owe it to our taxpayers. And I think James City County and Williamsburg has done an outstanding job as far as the money and the funding that we put in the school, far more than most of our communities surrounding us. And that's hats off to not only, you know, the boards, but also to our citizens and what they find value in. But there's a limit to everything. So we've just got to weigh those odds, and like everything else in our lives, you know, we've got X amount of money we can spend. We just got to make sure we spend it as wisely as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hippel. Mr. Dowell, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to say that the common thread that I hear throughout all of these talking points, the agreements, the disagreements, is simply seeking what's best for the community. I think we can all agree that that is, for me, it's an honor to be a part of this body and hear these conversations, be a part of these discussions. The task force, I'm really hopeful for that. What I'd like to hear before we do close down, and I think we got an indication that there's broad support for it, but where does it begin? Who does it respond or answer to? You know, who keeps it on the track? I'm encouraged by the opportunity to hear from this task force, and I'll be honest, if I was asked to sit on it, I would consider doing that. I believe in the work that it could do, but the encouragement that I see from it is actually hearing from our community. And I heard conversation about we can't always fulfill what the community desires, and I agree with that. But one aspect of this work would be hearing from the community what they intend to do. And so when we've been talking about the school board, the CIP, at which we will vote on Tuesday, I've been outspoken, and many of you are aware of that. And one of the reasons I've been outspoken, not in favor of the elementary school rather than preschool space discussion, is because what I'm hearing in Stonehouse District is that there is a different intent to return post-COVID, post-vaccine. I'm hearing that in Stonehouse District, that this has given them an opportunity, parents and students, to explore virtual learning, private education, homeschool education. Here just last night, I won't name the name on this quote, but I heard a parent in Stonehouse District say, well, it looks like we're going to be homeschooled for the rest of the year. I should have just, and then fill in the blank there. So that's the conversation piece that I'm looking forward to hearing as we're discussing looking at preschool, elementary school space going forward, what the intent of our community members is post-COVID for the best of their students, for the best education of their students. So that's all I wanted to add, and I just appreciated hearing all these conversation pieces as we go into further conversation, deliberation about the CIP. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd. The meeting is winding down. Is there one last comment or thought about any aspect of the CIP?
Well, I do want to follow up.
You're
on
gone.
Ms.
I don't see you. You're gone.
Sorry. I do want to follow up on Ms. Cook's comments, and I do appreciate that she said them, but I don't want to let them go unheard, because I think it's important, because we get a lot of pushback about this whole more schools issue. So I think the fact that we are investing the money in the upkeep, in the maintenance, and is very important. So sometimes just because you have more doesn't mean you can take care of it. So, you know, I just want the citizens of both the city and the county to know that they've been keeping the upkeep, and that's very, very important. And I know that I've heard that when I was on the school board, and I've heard it now on the Board of Supervisors, that, you know, the upkeep on our facilities is top notch. And so I really appreciate her bringing that out and me re-emphasizing it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. And then just an additional caveat, and I spoke to that earlier too, are the demographics. So if you look at the challenges that our students face compared to, say, those in York County, they're drastically different. Their SPED numbers, their L numbers, their homeless numbers are distinctly different. And so we are serving children with fewer buildings, which means less space. And quite frankly, our students have more challenges. So I think there's one more question. Mayor Pons, did you? Nope. Any additional comments? This has been a great joint meeting. I appreciate everyone's time and the collective effort and support of our schools, because we do have phenomenal schools, and it does take a community, and it takes like-minded folks to value education to ensure that we're meeting all the academic needs of our students. So I don't see any additional hands. I'm going to call on Mayor Pons to adjourn your board.
Thank you, Ms. Ownby. Ms. Fleeko, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
And Chairman Eisenhower, would you like to join your board?
Okay, we'll a motion to adjourn till 5 p.m. on the 8th, I believe it is. Mr. Stevens, call the roll.
Ms. Sadler,
Aye.
Mr. McGlennon,
Aye.
Ms. Larson,
Aye.
Mr. Hippel,
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, and I move that the Williamsburg-James City County School Board is adjourned. And now we can all wave like this and say goodbye. Okay. Have a great day, everybody.